Let me tell you something that will probably ruin a perfectly good science fiction movie for you, and I am genuinely sorry about that, but not sorry enough to stay quiet about it. People love the idea of alien visitors. They love it the way children love magic tricks, with that warm, comfortable suspension of disbelief that makes the world feel richer and more populated than it actually is. You have probably seen the videos, grainy footage, triangular lights over some military installation, a retired pilot squinting at a radar screen and saying things like, "I have never seen anything move like that." And the whole cultural machinery kicks into gear. The documentaries, the congressional hearings, the breathless speculation that perhaps, something out there has found us and is now doing laps around our atmosphere like a tourist circling a parking garage looking for a spot. I want to be honest with you the way a good friend is honest with you, which means I am going to say the uncomfortable thing directly. The universe does not work like that. Not because the aliens are hiding, not because they have decided we are not worth visiting, although, fair enough on their part, but because the physics of this cosmos, the hard, cold, magnificent equations that govern everything from the orbit of electrons to the geometry of spacetime itself, those equations do not contain a single loophole that makes casual interstellar visits physically possible. Not for us, not for anyone, not for anything made of matter that obeys the same rulebook as everything else in the observable universe. And the rulebook, I have to tell you, is absolutely merciless. Think about two fruit flies. I know, but stay with me here, because this analogy is going to do real work. Two fruit flies, and one is born in New York, and one is born in Tokyo. Both of them are alive. Both of them, let us imagine for a moment, want desperately to meet each other. They have the desire. They have the intention. Maybe they even have the technology, which for a fruit fly means wings, which is honestly remarkable if you think about it. But between them lies the Pacific Ocean, not a pond, not a river. An absolutely enormous, churning, violent body of water that does not care about their desires at all. And a fruit fly lives for somewhere between 2 weeks and 2 months. The ocean does not shrink. The clock does not pause. The mathematics of the situation simply execute their verdict without any emotional investment whatsoever, and the fruit flies never meet. Not because they lack the will, because the geometry of their situation, combined with the hard limit of their lifespan, made the meeting a physical impossibility. Now replace the fruit flies with civilizations. Replace the Pacific Ocean with 4 light-years of interstellar void, which is the distance to our nearest stellar neighbor, Alpha Centauri, which is itself a kind of insult when you understand what 4 light-years actually contains. It contains nothing, mostly nothing. Some hydrogen atoms scattered so thinly that if you tried to breathe the interstellar medium, you would get approximately 1 atom per breath over the span of several years. It is a vacuum so profound that our best laboratory vacuums on Earth look like soup by comparison. And that 4 light-years is the nearest option. The galaxy is 100,000 light-years across. The nearest large galaxy is 2.5 million light-years away. The observable universe stretches out to about 46 billion light-years in all directions. These are not large numbers. They are not even numbers I can make you feel properly, because the human brain did not evolve to feel numbers that big. It evolved to feel the distance to the next watering hole, which was maybe a few miles. So when I say 46 billion light-years, your brain hears a big number and nods politely and moves on. And I need you to understand that this is a catastrophic failure of imagination that the universe will absolutely not compensate for on your behalf. So, let us talk about the first wall, the first truly fundamental physical barrier. And it is not a wall that any engineering genius can dismantle, because it is not made of material. It is made of geometry. The speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. People hear that and think fast, really fast. And yes, it is fast. A photon of light can circle the entire Earth 7.5 times in a single second. That is genuinely impressive. But here is where I need you to shift your mental frame entirely, because the speed of light is not impressive because it is fast. The speed of light is significant because it is the speed of causality itself. What I mean by that is this. Einstein's general relativity, which has been tested with extraordinary precision and has never once been wrong in a way that undermined its core claims, tells us something shocking about the geometry of spacetime. It tells us that space and time are not separate things. They are woven into a single four-dimensional fabric, and the way objects move through that fabric is constrained by a geometric speed limit that is baked into the structure of reality at its most fundamental level. When you travel through space, you are also traveling through time, and the total rate at which you move through this combined space-time fabric is always the speed of light, always. When you are sitting still, you are moving through time at the speed of light. Every second that passes for you is a second of motion through the time dimension of space-time. When you start moving through space, you borrow from your time motion. Move faster through space, and time slows down for you. This is not a theory. This is a measured, confirmed, GPS-corrected fact that your phone relies on every single day to tell you where the nearest coffee shop is. Now push this to its logical conclusion. To move through space at the speed of light, you would have to stop moving through time entirely. Time would freeze for you. And to go faster than light, you would need to move backward through time, which is not a quirky engineering challenge. It is a statement that causality itself breaks down. It means effects happen before causes. It means the universe becomes logically incoherent. The speed of light is not a speed limit on a highway where you can perhaps exceed it if you are willing to pay a fine. It is the speed at which the geometry of reality itself propagates. It is the speed of cause and effect. Breaking it does not mean going fast. It means dismantling the logical structure of the universe, and the universe has not demonstrated any willingness to cooperate with that request. So, any physical object, any ship made of matter, any biological alien strapped into a seat and breathing recycled air and hoping to make it to Earth for a visit must travel slower than light. This is not negotiable, and at any speed slower than light, crossing even 4 light-years takes more than 4 years. At 1/10 the speed of light, which would require genuinely staggering amounts of energy that I will come to in a moment, the journey takes 40 years. At 1/100th the speed of light, 400 years. To cross the galaxy, 100,000 light-years, even at 1/10 the speed of light, takes 1 million years. The biological crew would be dust. Their civilization might be dust. Their star might have changed. And this is assuming their civilization is only 100,000 light-years away, which, given the size of the observable universe, makes them practically our next-door neighbors. Now let us talk about the second wall, and this one is the kind of wall that makes engineers weep quietly into their calculations. The Tsiolkovsky rocket equation. Named after a Russian schoolteacher named Konstantin Tsiolkovsky who worked it out in the late 1800s, and it is one of those beautiful pieces of mathematics that is simple to write down and catastrophic to understand. It relates the change in velocity of a rocket to the mass of the fuel it carries, and the relationship is exponential. This means that as you want to go faster, the fuel you need does not increase linearly, it explodes upward in a curve that becomes essentially vertical. Here is a concrete way to feel this. The Saturn V rocket, the most powerful rocket ever successfully launched by human beings, was, by mass, about 94% fuel at launch. The actual payload, the people, the spacecraft, the equipment, represented about 6% of the total mass. And that got us to the moon and back, which is roughly 250,000 miles away. Alpha Centauri is about 25 trillion miles away. To accelerate a spacecraft, with a crew, with life support, with radiation shielding, with food and water, to even 1/10 the speed of light, using conventional chemical propulsion, you would need a fuel mass so incomprehensibly large that the numbers lose meaning. We are talking about something that dwarfs planets. And this does not even account for the fact that once you have accelerated, you have to decelerate at the other end, which costs just as much fuel again, and then you have to accelerate back and decelerate back. The rocket equation is merciless about this. Every single kilogram of shielding you add to protect the crew from cosmic radiation requires exponentially more fuel, which adds more mass, which requires more fuel, which adds more mass, in a spiral that the mathematics simply refuse to resolve into anything practical. You might say, well, what about nuclear propulsion, or antimatter, or some exotic physics we have not discovered yet? And here I want to be very careful, because this is exactly the point where intellectual honesty matters most. Nuclear fission and fusion improve your energy density enormously compared to chemical fuels. Antimatter, if you could produce and store it, gives you the maximum possible energy density allowed by Einstein's E equals mc squared. These are genuine improvements. But even with antimatter, reaching any meaningful fraction of the speed of light requires consuming antimatter with a mass comparable to the mass of the ship itself. The production of antimatter requires energy. That energy has to come from somewhere. The scale of the engineering infrastructure required to produce enough antimatter to fuel even a single interstellar voyage is so large that it strains comparison. We are talking about energy budgets that rival the total output of stars. And cosmic radiation is not a footnote. At 10% of the speed of light, the interstellar medium, those sparse hydrogen atoms I mentioned earlier, those essentially empty atoms, hit the ship with the energy of nuclear particles. The ship needs shielding. The shielding needs to be thick and heavy. The heavier the shielding, the more fuel you need. The more fuel you need, the heavier the ship. The heavier the ship, the more fuel. The equation spirals. The mathematics execute their verdict without mercy. This is not a temporary engineering problem waiting for a clever solution. It is a fundamental physical constraint that operates at the level of how mass and energy relate to each other, which is one of the most thoroughly tested relationships in all of science. And here we arrive at the third wall, and this one is perhaps the most quietly devastating of all three, because it is not about speed, and it is not about fuel. It is about time. Deep time, the terrifying mathematics of when. The universe is approximately 13.8 billion years old. In terms of cosmic time, that is a moderate age. Stars formed roughly 100 million years after the Big Bang. The first generation of stars, the very first ones, lived fast and died in supernova explosions, and those explosions seeded the universe with heavy elements, carbon, oxygen, iron, the stuff that planets and biology are built from. Without that stellar death, you cannot have rocky planets. Without rocky planets, you probably cannot have biology as we understand it. This means life based on carbon chemistry could not have appeared until several billion years into the universe's history, after at least one generation of stars had lived and died. Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago. Single-celled life appeared here roughly 3.5 billion years ago. Complex multicellular life about 600 million years ago. Homo sapiens about 300,000 years ago. Radio technology about 100 years ago. The total window during which we have been broadcasting detectable signals into space, signals that could theoretically tell another civilization we exist, is about 100 years. In a galaxy that is 100,000 light-years across, those signals have only reached a sphere 100 light-years in radius. That sphere contains a few thousand stars out of the approximately 400 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Now consider this. For two civilizations to visit each other, they need to exist at the same cosmic moment, not the same year, not the same century. In the context of a 14 billion-year-old universe, I mean the same geological era. A civilization that arose and collapsed 100 million years before us, in the geological era equivalent of the dinosaurs, is simply gone. Their cities are dust. Their signals have spread so thin across the universe that they are indistinguishable from background noise. They cannot visit us because they do not exist anymore. We cannot visit them because we did not exist yet. The universe spread them out in time the way it spread them out in space, and time is not a dimension you can simply cross by burning enough fuel. The mathematical probability that two civilizations evolve to technological sophistication at the same cosmic moment, meaning within a few tens of thousands of years of each other, and that they also happen to be located within physically traversable distance of each other, meaning within some extremely generous maximum travel range, and that this maximum travel range overlaps with actual habitable systems. When you multiply these probability fractions together, the result is so small that it does not require us to postulate a universe hostile to life. It only requires a universe indifferent to scheduling. The cosmos does not keep a calendar. It does not arrange for civilizations to bloom simultaneously. It blooms and dies on timescales so enormous that the entire history of human civilization, from the first stone tool to the last nuclear warhead, is a thinner slice of cosmic time than a single frame of a movie is to the complete runtime of the history of cinema. Two civilizations lighting up in the same moment is not just unlikely. It is, when you work through the numbers honestly, a vanishingly improbable coincidence that gets more improbable the larger the universe turns out to be, and the universe, it turns out, is very large. So here is where I leave you, and I want to leave you in the right frame of mind, because I am aware that everything I have just described sounds like bad news, and I do not think it is. We are sitting on a rock, orbiting an ordinary star, in the outer arm of a completely unremarkable spiral galaxy, and we are conscious. We can do mathematics. We can measure the speed of light to extraordinary precision. We can derive the rocket equation from first principles and understand why it crushes our ambitions. We can look at the cosmic microwave background radiation, the faint afterglow of the Big Bang itself, and read the history of the universe in it. We can look up and genuinely understand, in a deep physical sense, why the universe is structured in a way that keeps biological minds isolated from each other behind walls of causality, energy, and time. That is not a small thing. That is a genuinely astonishing thing. The absence of alien visitors is not a cosmic disappointment. It is a window into the actual architecture of a universe that is far more interesting, far more demanding, and far more honest than any story we tell about flying saucers. The speed of light is not a barrier that robs us of neighbors. It is a constant that holds the geometry of space-time together and gives us a universe in which cause genuinely precedes effect, in which information travels at a finite speed, and therefore gives the universe a coherent local structure, in which physics is the same everywhere, because the same fundamental constants are enforced everywhere. The rocket equation is not a punishment. It is a direct consequence of conservation of momentum, which is one of the most beautiful and universal symmetries in all of nature, a symmetry that says the universe keeps its books balanced, always, without exception, without forgiveness. Deep time is not an obstacle. It is the canvas on which everything that exists has been painted, including us. The fact that we arose at this particular moment, after the universe had spent billions of years building the heavy elements in stellar cores and scattering them through supernovae and then assembling them into rocky planets, and then waiting for chemistry to stumble into biology, and then waiting for biology to stumble into consciousness. All of that waiting, all of that time, produced something that can look back at the process and understand it. That is, if you want my personal and completely physical opinion, considerably more interesting than a flying saucer.